Neither of them saw it coming. She had just delivered what she believed was a devastating blow. A scalpel-sharp question aimed at cornering a man she saw as outdated, ideological, and easily outmaneuvered. But this wasn't just any man. This was a constitutionalist, a Southern statesman, and a man known for weaving razor wit into moral steel. The cameras were live. Over 12 million Americans were watching as the Senate hearing, originally intended to be a showcase of progressive clarity, turned into something else entirely. Warren thought she had him pinned, but what Kennedy said next didn't just silence her, it cracked the room wide open. What were the 7 words that stopped Senator Warren cold? What could this Louisiana Republican possibly say that would make 3 major networks quietly remove the footage from replay? This is the story of one of the most explosive political confrontations in recent memory, when unshakable conviction met ideological absolutism head-on. It all began the moment Senator Warren made the fatal mistake of underestimating the wrong man, on the wrong issue, on the wrong day. 3 weeks earlier, in a modest, book-filled office in Madisonville, Louisiana, John Neely Kennedy sat alone in a leather chair, sipping black coffee from a chipped mug. He wasn't reviewing polling data or press briefings. He was reading the Federalist Papers. A man of tradition and principle, Kennedy believed you didn't fight politics with performance. You fought it with truth and tenacity. That's when his phone buzzed. The caller, Elizabeth Warren's chief Senate committee aide. She was inviting Kennedy to participate in a televised Unity and Progress hearing, a forum Warren was chairing that would feature professors, activists, and moral leaders speaking on systemic reform and spiritual renewal in public life. Kennedy knew the setup. He'd seen it before. The panels filled with buzzwords and book deals, the guests promising empowerment at $990 per course. He had watched as principles were reduced to talking points, and as American values were hollowed out in the name of branding. He almost declined, but then came a tug in his conscience, that quiet Southern instinct that said, "Boy, you know better than to let nonsense go unanswered." This wasn't just a hearing, it was an assignment. His office was plain, no gold plaques, no ego mirrors, just shelves of worn volumes on law, scripture, and liberty, photos of his parents, and letters from farmers, veterans, and single moms across Louisiana. People who didn't need hashtags, they needed truth. John Kennedy didn't seek the spotlight. He'd refused more Sunday show invitations than he could count. He wasn't here to sell a podcast or a memoir, but this invitation, this was different. So he said yes. In the days leading up to the event, Kennedy prepared, not with consultants or speech writers, but with the Constitution, old sermons, and deep, still prayer. He reviewed Warren's recent proposals, particularly her Moral Governance Manifesto, a sprawling program that offered justice-based enlightenment to civil servants for a price. Workshops, affirmations, behavioral realignment courses, some priced upwards of $12,200 per session. He thought about the families in Ruston and Shreveport scraping to afford groceries, now being told that real leadership required attending a rebranding retreat. He thought about Americans who didn't have TED Talks, just pain, dignity, and a hope that someone, somewhere still spoke plain truth. He knew what he was walking into, a furnace of optics, applause lines, and ideology. But sometimes you walk into the fire because silence would be cowardice. The morning of the hearing, Kennedy walked into the Capitol chamber with no entourage, no pre-approved script, just a copy of the Constitution tucked in his jacket and a yellow legal pad of handwritten notes. The rotunda echoed with the sound of heels and microphones. On the panel were best-selling authors, media coaches, self-proclaimed thought leaders, each one eager to pitch their platform. Kennedy sat quietly, flipping through a page of Psalms before the gavel fell. Then came a staffer, clipboard in hand. "Senator Kennedy, we've got suggested talking points," she said sweetly. "You might want to reference your faith, mention any mentorship work, maybe tease a future book deal. Our audience eats that stuff up." Kennedy looked at her, polite but dry as red clay. "Darling, I'm not here to feed the audience. I'm here to feed the truth." The young aide blinked. She hadn't heard that before. He wasn't playing the game. He'd come for something else entirely. The assistant froze. She looked like she had never heard those words before. Kennedy wasn't there to play politics. He had come for something else entirely. As the other panelists took their turn, authors, consultants, progressive influencers, Kennedy waited in the wings, quietly flipping through his dog-eared copy of the Constitution, underlined in red ink. Senator Warren, chairing the event with polished ease, moved briskly through the lineup. Each guest offered promises of transformation, moral clarity via digital courses, peace through behavioral alignment, prosperity through progressive spirituality. Every segment ended the same way, with a book to buy, a link to follow, a fee to pay. The audience clapped enthusiastically, eager for feel-good words dressed in academic polish. But Kennedy saw something deeper. Hope was being sold like a product, not offered as principle, but bartered like a brand. He felt the weight of what was coming. He wasn't there to dazzle. He wasn't there to be safe. He was there to speak hard truth in a soft-spoken age. When his name was called, John Neely Kennedy stepped forward. No staffers trailing, no microphone clip by handlers, just his old LSU blazer, his weathered Constitution, and a slow Louisiana drawl that had disarmed more than one Ivy League panel. Warren welcomed him with a politician's smile, warm, deliberate, studied. But Kennedy caught it, the subtle twitch in her eyes, the internal calibration, the sizing up of an ideological opponent. The audience clapped politely, but something in the air had shifted. They sensed this wasn't going to be another polished TED Talk. Kennedy sat down, folded his hands on the table, and said nothing. He prayed silently. Lord, help me speak truth clearly and without cruelty. Help me serve, not perform. Then Warren began. Senator Kennedy, she said in her measured tone, you've become somewhat of a voice for traditional values in a rapidly changing nation. Tell us, what personal practices have helped you reach that level of awareness and civic enlightenment? Kennedy blinked slowly. He caught the framing. Practices, awareness, enlightenment. He knew exactly what this was. He could dance to the music, or he could cut it off. So he leaned forward. Senator Warren, he began, calm and unbothered. I reckon that there's a bit of confusion here. I'm not chasing consciousness. I don't have a meditation app. And I sure ain't trying to reach cosmic alignment. I follow the Constitution, and I believe in the God who authored natural law. The room tensed. You could feel it. Warren's smile didn't vanish, but it thinned like a line drawn too tightly. Some in the crowd shifted in their seats, unsure of what to make of his clarity, but Kennedy didn't flinch. Everything I am, he said, flows from a deep conviction that this country was founded on objective truth, not workshop slogans or self-actualization guides. Warren pivoted quickly, polished as ever, smile polished to a gleam. Well, Senator, she said, there are many paths to civic virtue and many moral frameworks. Surely we can agree that it's all driven by a universal desire for justice and equality, whatever form that takes. Her tone was graceful, poised, the kind of delivery meant to equalize worldviews by softening their edges. But Kennedy saw it for what it was. She wasn't respecting his message. She was diluting it. And that moment, that exact moment, was when everything changed. Actually, Senator, Kennedy said with firm politeness, I'll have to disagree, respectfully, but absolutely. Justice doesn't come in infinite flavors, and truth doesn't shapeshift just to avoid offense. This country isn't held together by feelings. It's held together by facts. The chamber fell silent. Even the cameraman paused, as if not sure where to cut. Warren's eyes flickered, not with panic, but with recalibration. Her entire worldview, a tapestry of pluralism and fluid morality, had just been confronted by something she rarely encountered in that space. Conviction without apology. She leaned in, voice steady but edged. Senator Kennedy, are you suggesting that billions of people who hold different views, spiritual or civic, are simply wrong? Isn't that the danger of absolutism? Isn't that the arrogance of religion, of nationalism, of exclusivity? It was a calculated strike, meant to frame him as intolerant, backward, rigid. But Kennedy had seen this fire before, and he knew that kindness and cowardice are not the same thing. He leaned in slightly, voice low, eyes anchored in sincerity. Senator Warren, I'd never call someone evil for what they believe. I've met too many good folks with different views. But truth, real truth, doesn't flex for fashion. Good intentions don't rewrite reality. And sincerity doesn't equal accuracy. He looked toward the crowd, not to perform, but to connect. We can be civil, we can be kind, but if we blur every line to avoid discomfort, pretty soon we don't have a map, just noise. It's defined by what's real, Kennedy said flatly. Then he paused, let the silence work, the kind of silence that made truth feel like thunder. And with that same slow, deliberate tone that made him a folk hero to some and a puzzle to others, he added, if my house is on fire, and I sincerely believe that sweet tea will put it out. My sincerity doesn't change what I need to survive. The truth is, it takes water to put out a fire. The analogy struck like a hammer. Simple, undeniable, Southern in its charm, brutal in its clarity. People in the hearing room who'd been visibly uncomfortable began nodding. Some reluctantly, some like they'd been waiting for someone to finally say it. Even in a space meant for performative applause, you could hear the silence stretch like a tight wire. Senator Warren's expression tightened. The smile she wore like armor cracked just slightly. Frustration flickered. She wasn't used to this. Not on her stage. Then came the pivot, smooth in tone, sharp in substance. But Senator Kennedy, she said, her voice slipping into something more professor than peer, don't you think it's arrogant to claim that your worldview is the only correct one? What about all the ancient traditions that have guided civilizations for centuries? She delivered it like a well-worn lecture, the kind you give to a student who just doesn't understand nuance. The audience murmured again, some nodding with her, others unsure. Kennedy leaned forward, no condescension, just clarity. Senator Warren, I'm not here to defend institutions. I'm not here to preach denominational dogma. I'm here to say this plain and true: principles are not products. See, when values get packaged and sold, when government starts acting like a guru, we lose the soul of the republic. Belief should change hearts, not chase markets. That line dropped like a lead weight. Warren blinked. She knew it wasn't vague. It wasn't a general critique. He was talking about her, and everyone knew it. The American ideal I believe in, Kennedy continued, voice calm but now burning with restrained urgency, didn't come wrapped in VIP tickets and progress-themed merchandise. It came in sacrifice, in sweat, in service. And none of that came with a subscription fee. The words didn't just settle, they pierced. Even the cameras paused, unsure whether to zoom or freeze. Warren's control slipped. Not her words. They were still composed, but her body shifted. Her composure cracked. Her jaw stiffened. Then came her counterattack. She leaned in, voice lower, controlled, but the edge beneath it was unmistakable. Let's be honest, Senator, she said, now dropping the pretense of flattery. You've made a career off of faith, patriotism, and theater. Isn't it a little hypocritical to accuse others of commercializing morality when your entire brand rests on sounding like a homespun prophet with a legal pad and a punchline? The audience perked up, blood in the water. But what Warren didn't realize, what she hadn't prepared for, was that Kennedy's humility wasn't his weak spot. It was his weapon. He reached into the inside pocket of his weathered jacket, pulled out a folded slip of paper, the kind that looks like it's been read, reread, and prayed over more than once. He unfolded it slowly and held it up. Senator, he said in that syrupy, slow Louisiana drawl, you're absolutely right to ask that. That's why I brought this. He turned the paper toward the cameras. This is my personal bank statement from last month. Balance? $1,843. The room gasped. Even the staffers looked at each other, unsure what they were watching. I give away everything I don't need to survive, he said plainly. I live in the same house I did before I got to D.C. I drive a Ford pickup older than some of your interns. And most nights I eat beans and cornbread at my kitchen table. Warren sat frozen. This wasn't in the playbook. This wasn't a soundbite. This was uncomfortable, real-life conviction. You see, Kennedy continued, when Jesus sent out his disciples, he didn't say bring backup. He said bring nothing. No bag, no cash, no plan B. Because it's not about being poor. It's about where your treasure is. And in that moment, the Senate chamber didn't feel like a hearing. It felt like a courtroom, and every person in it, a witness. The faces in the room had changed. They weren't just listening anymore. They were examining. Two leaders, two ideologies, and two kingdoms. Warren's voice rose, no longer pristine, now tinged with anger. That's easy to say when you're the one getting all the attention, Senator. The awards, the interviews. Don't sit there and pretend you're humble when half the country sees you as some backwoods oracle in a suit. It was meant to be the knockout punch, but instead, it exposed something. Warren was no longer debating, she was reacting. And Kennedy, he didn't flinch. Kennedy had seen this moment coming the whole time, and he wasn't done yet. He rose from his seat, slowly, deliberately, and the entire chamber seemed to hold its breath. Senator Warren, he said, voice low but steady, I'm not pretending to be anything I'm not. I'm not claiming to be some savior. I'm just a man pointing to what never changes and what this country's forgotten. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was sacred. As for the attention you mentioned, Kennedy continued, his voice grounded in humility, most of it comes from folks who are desperate for hope, for meaning, for someone, anyone to tell them they're not alone. He looked out at the crowd. They're the same people who watch your speeches, Senator, who buy into your programs, who attend your town halls, hungry, searching, looking for answers in a world that keeps offering them slogans. That line hit like a lightning bolt. A ripple passed through the audience. For a moment, everyone stopped pretending. Kennedy could see it in Warren's eyes now, the subtle flicker of realization. She had built an empire on the ache of people's souls, but somewhere along the way, she had stopped feeding them truth. She'd replaced it with polish, production, and performance. The tension in the room thickened. Warren, visibly unsettled, tried to regain control. Her voice turned sharp, cold. You know I think, Senator Kennedy? The smile was gone. Only the fire remained. I think you're just another fundamentalist disguising moral absolutism as patriotism. I think you're dangerous. The strike wasn't rooted in logic. It was born of fear. A cornered empire lashing out. The chamber gasped, but Kennedy didn't blink. He didn't fight back. Instead, he reached slowly into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded note, handwritten, creased, worn at the edges. 3 days ago, he began quietly, I got a letter from a little boy in Shreveport. His name is Michael, he's 7, and he's dying of leukemia. A hush fell over the room. Even Warren didn't speak. His mama wrote me, Kennedy continued, said he watches my old C-SPAN clips, not for politics, but because he likes the way I talk about God. The crowd leaned in. She asked if I could send him a message, just to remind him that he's not forgotten. Kennedy's voice cracked ever so slightly. Michael asked if there really is a heaven, if God really loves little boys with tubes in their arms. He paused. I told him yes, that there's a place more beautiful than anything here, that he is known and seen and deeply loved. Now grown adults were crying in their seats. Even the camera crew stood still, silent, reverent. Then Kennedy turned his gaze to Warren. And then Michael asked me a question I couldn't shake. He asked, that lady on TV who talks about justice, does she know God too? Because she looks kind of sad when she smiles. The words landed like a gavel, and for the first time, Elizabeth Warren was speechless. The armor cracked, the performance slipped, everyone saw it, and no one could unsee it. Kennedy continued softly, I told Michael only God knows the heart. But I also said this, pray for the people who speak in public about truth, because that's a heavy thing to carry. That little boy, in his suffering, knew the difference between someone who carries truth and someone who performs it. Warren's hands trembled slightly. Her voice barely escaped her lips. That's emotional manipulation, she said, but no one was convinced. She looked out at the crowd, and for the first time, they weren't smiling back. There was no applause, just stillness and truth. Kennedy shook his head gently, no malice in his voice. No, Senator. That's just a little boy who hasn't learned how to lie to himself yet. Kids see what adults try to ignore. He reached into his other pocket and pulled out his phone. Michael is watching this hearing right now, he said, looking directly at her. His mama texted me this morning. He was excited to see the man who talks about God and the lady who talks about justice in the same room. He turned the screen toward Warren. Would you like me to call him? You can tell him that hope is naive, that faith is just a product, that truth is whatever polls best. The challenge wasn't loud, but it thundered through the Senate chamber. The challenge thundered, and Senator Warren went pale. For the first time in her political career, she had no words. Here stood a child, 7 years old, terminally ill, with nothing but faith to hold on to. And Warren, the voice of reason, the champion of progress, had just spent 30 minutes trying to dismantle the very thing giving that child hope. The audience watched her now, not with admiration, but with disbelief and something close to fear. They were beginning to understand what was being asked of her, to look into the soul of a dying child and tell him his faith was a fantasy. I can't, Warren whispered. Her voice barely registered, but it said everything. The admission wasn't just revealing, it was devastating. The senator who had built her public identity on empowerment, on truth-telling, couldn't bring herself to destroy a little boy's hope. Not in that moment, not when it was real, not when the TV lights couldn't hide it. She had commodified faith for voters, branded it in language that fit her policy. Now, face to face with its raw, unfiltered power, she broke. Kennedy's voice softened, not smug, not triumphant, just deeply human. Senator Warren, he said gently, I don't believe you want to hurt Michael or anybody else. I believe somewhere deep down, you truly want to help people. He paused, his eyes, sorrowful but steady, met hers with the kind of gaze that couldn't be faked, the kind Jesus might have given the rich young ruler. Love and sorrow, together. But somewhere along the way, Kennedy continued, you started believing you could improve what truth offers. You tried to make it more palatable, more profitable, more popular. He took a breath. And in doing that, you ended up with something less. His voice sharpened, not with anger, but with urgency. When you try to make the truth more comfortable, you make it less powerful. When you try to make it for everyone, you risk making it for no one. Truth doesn't come to validate our choices. It comes to change our hearts. And hope doesn't come to make us rich. It comes to make us righteous. Each line struck like a chisel, not on her reputation, but on her armor. Decades of polish, slogans, platforms, cracking under the weight of something unfiltered. Warren sat motionless, not angry, just shaken. The audience, frozen. Some wept quietly, others sat in stunned silence. But all of them were listening. Many had spent thousands on conferences, books, and branded morality. Now they realized the thing they were looking for had always been free. Kennedy turned to them with a tenderness that almost hurt to watch. You don't have to buy truth, he said softly. You don't have to earn love. You don't have to prove your worth. Grace is not a product. It's a gift. And it's for anyone who comes with empty hands and an honest heart. Then it happened. Warren found her voice, but it was no longer bold, no longer scripted. It was small, fragile, and honest. But what about all the people I've helped? She asked. Her voice trembled. What about the lives I've changed with my work? The words weren't defensive. They were desperate. The cry of a woman who had built her entire identity on impact and now wondered if that impact had missed the mark. Kennedy's face softened even further. I believe you have helped people, Elizabeth. Kindness is always good. Encouragement matters. But there's a difference between helping people feel better and helping them find what's eternally true. It's not enough to inspire people to believe in themselves if we never point them to the one who created them. Then, for the first time in the hearing, Kennedy asked the one question that no one else had dared to speak aloud. The question isn't, have you done good? It's, have you pointed people to the one who is good? Have you led people to the source of hope? Or have you become a substitute for it? The words landed like a final chord, clear, resounding, unshakable. And that's when it happened. Elizabeth Warren, Harvard professor, progressive icon, senator of the people, crumbled. Her face fell, her shoulders slumped, and her voice just a whisper. What if you're right? What if I've been wrong about everything? The vulnerability shook the room. No camera angle could soften it. No reputation could shield it. She wasn't a senator anymore. She was just a human being asking the only question that truly matters. The audience held its breath. This wasn't a Senate hearing anymore. This was sacred ground. And Kennedy, he stepped forward. Kennedy didn't move. Not a word, not a twitch, just stillness, the kind that isn't empty, but holy. He waited. And then she stood. Senator Elizabeth Warren, the architect of policy, the professor of progress, the woman whose voice shaped legislation and headlines, slowly walked across the hearing floor. And without a word, she knelt, right beside him. Tears poured down her face, not for the cameras, not for applause, but for truth. And in that kneeling, decades of pride, self-reliance, an ideological empire building collapsed. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. I don't know how to stop being in control. The hearing room froze. This wasn't politics. This wasn't theater. This was surrender. In one trembling sentence, she confessed what no pundit, opponent, or voter could have forced out of her. She wasn't enough. Kennedy knelt beside her. No spotlight, no performance, just presence. That's exactly where truth finds us, he said softly. At the end of ourselves, when there's no more spin, no more image, only the quiet question, God, are you still there? He looked up toward the gallery. Many were openly weeping. Some had dropped to their knees beside staff benches. Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven," Kennedy said quietly. He wasn't talking about folks with power. He was talking about those who finally know they've got nothing but a need for grace. He turned gently back to Warren. Would you like me to pray with you? She nodded, barely able to form the word. Kennedy bowed his head. Jesus, here's your daughter, Elizabeth. She's tired of holding it all together, tired of performing strength. She doesn't want image anymore. She wants you. And in that moment, the hearing ended. Not with gavels, not with talking points, with worship, real, unpolished, holy. Warren wept, not the dignified, camera-ready tears of capital testimony, but the gut-deep, soul-tearing kind that says, I've missed it, and I'm done pretending. She wept for the years she had sold hope she didn't fully understand. For the walls she had built instead of the bridge she had just found. The chamber watched with open mouths and open hearts. Some whispered prayers, some simply watched, undone by what they were seeing. When the prayer ended, Warren remained there, still, silent. She looked up at Kennedy. Her eyes were clearer than they had been in decades. What happens now? She asked. Small voice, open heart. Kennedy smiled, not smug, not victorious, just like a man who had seen truth free another soul. Now you stop trying to improve God, Senator. You stop trying to lead truth. You walk with it, not ahead, not behind, with it, because being his is better than trying to be your own good. The hardness in her eyes was gone. In its place, something gentler, cleaner, real. There was no applause music, no press release, no catchy hashtags, just silence, holy silence. When Warren finally rose, her body trembled. She looked out at the crowd, not as a leader, but as a fellow traveler. I don't know what this means for my political career, she said honestly, but I know I can't go back to pretending I have all the answers, when I've just realized I've been asking the wrong questions. Soft applause followed. Not political applause, not performative claps, but something tear-stained, reverent. In the weeks that followed, Elizabeth Warren shocked the nation. She dismantled her branded truth-telling programs. She canceled self-empowerment summits. She withdrew from consulting partnerships that commodified faith or identity. And in a quiet 5-minute video uploaded with no music and no edits, she said, I've spent years giving people what they wanted to hear, but I failed to give them what they needed. I pointed them to themselves when I should have pointed them to their creator. The financial fallout was massive, but the spiritual shift was eternal. 6 months later, a local Louisiana paper ran a quiet headline that most of the national outlets missed. Senator Elizabeth Warren spotted visiting children's hospitals without media. No cameras, no press, just her, a book, a Bible, and a quiet prayer. One of the children she visited? Michael, still alive, still fighting, still smiling. And to every visitor, he whispered the same thing. Miss Elizabeth found Jesus too, just like me. The ripple from that hearing never stopped. Not because it went viral, but because it was true. Millions rewatched the moment not for spectacle, but because they saw something they couldn't find anywhere else. Humility, repentance, grace, the kind that saves. One woman wrote in a comment, I watched the most powerful woman I knew admit she needed a savior. If she can kneel in front of truth, maybe I can too. Senator Kennedy went back to his work, his state, his duties, his yellow legal pad and black coffee. But his legacy wasn't in floor speeches or election ads anymore. It was, in truth, lived. Truth that cracked through pride and found a soul. And Senator Warren, she no longer saw herself as a brand, or a movement, or a progressive icon. She was just someone saved by grace. I thought I was successful when I had everything I wanted, she told a reporter a year later. I found out I was truly successful when I wanted what God wanted. Now the question is yours. What if, like Elizabeth Warren, you've been asking the wrong questions? Then maybe, just maybe, it's time to take the first step towards the one who's been waiting for you all along. Arms open, grace ready, love unlimited. And if you believe some truths are worth standing for, no matter the upbringing, share this story with someone who needs it. And in the comments below, tell us, what would you have said in that moment? Thank you for making it to the end of this story. If you were moved by what you just saw, if you ever believed in second chances or felt that a simple action can change a life, this channel is for you. Subscribe and join us for more real and emotional stories that remind us what it means to be human. Your support not only helps the channel grow, but also brings these messages to more people who may need it today. See you in the next video.